Welcome to the CG Pro podcast. This is episode 65 with Ian Fursa. And if you enjoy what you hear today, you can follow us at becomecgpro.com, join our free Facebook group. With that said, I will jump into today's session. So welcome to episode 65. We're here in LA on a rare, beautiful rainy day in Los Angeles, and I'd like to welcome Ian to the podcast. Ian is a virtual production supervisor. He's been in the world of production for 12 plus years and as a VP Soup for 3+ years, and has worked with big brands like Apple and Netflix and all kinds of good stuff like that. So with that said, Ian, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Great to have you.
It is definitely not rainy here in Philadelphia. It is nice and sunny. There's a little bit of nice sunlight coming through the window.
And
it's dynamic too. It's nice. Going to move as we talk too. It's crazy the way time works.
There's some virtual sun in the background there. I love it. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did particularly love to hear like your kind of origin story? How did you get going in production? Whether particularly love hearing about like any early inspirations or things that steered you in this direction.
Yeah. So I'll go back a little bit. So I'll go back just a hair further than I normally tell this. Just to give you. So first, I was born. Maybe it could have been before. I could have been created before I was born, but that's another subject. So I always was into philosophy and art and storytelling. Even when I was young, I played with cameras and always loved understanding, artistic stuff as much as possible. Like tried to do a little bit of graphic design, and this is like early high school years when those tools first started becoming available on PCs. And then I got really into music. First, I started playing acoustic guitar and singing, which led eventually to playing shows and then recording myself. And then I realized that I kind of fell in love with audio engineering. So the idea of designing sound and capturing it, and originally starting with Microsoft Recorder and you remember those little like pencil microphones that you could buy at Radio Shack that were that's what I started with, recording like acoustic guitar and things like that, because I wanted to capture what I was doing live somehow. But then eventually I fell in love with that and started working in recording studios, producing music, and started dabbling more in the acoustic design and actual audio engineering. So that's like studying signal chain, and started consulting on building recording studios and designing stuff. And this is probably my early to mid, getting into early 20s. And then I started that early. I didn't go any traditional path of, I had my day jobs that I would work when, that stuff was slow and stuff. But that production and that kind of world, media content, has always been what I just have to do. So then engineering, I kind of got sick of listening to the same drummer play the same beat over and over and over again for 3 days straight, sitting at a desk. And that really started to make it not fun for me anymore, because I felt like I've read most of the books that they taught for the basic sound design. And unless I really dove into the consulting side of building studios, I didn't want to do it. So I kind of took a step back and had already been doing videos content for the artists that would come into my studio. So I would just be like, oh, well, do you want to just play that song a couple times and I'll do a couple video clips? And I started to get more into the video production side of things, having already done photography for a couple years, and then started a production company eventually. and found out what a cinematographer was. So I realized that what I was in my room playing with, lights and putting things in front of them and playing with different backdrops and all those things, I was learning cinematography. But at that time, I didn't fully understand production and understand how departments are built out and all the politics that actually goes into filmmaking. But ran a production company for a while and did everything from music videos to commercials and live event stuff. The last thing we did before COVID happened was the Philadelphia Chefs Conference, which is a huge event that comes to Philadelphia at Drexel University, where all of the chefs that you see on the shows on Netflix and all of that come to just sit in a panel and talk about things. So we did all the video coverage for that. And then March, was it 2020 now, happened, and they were like, we don't even need the deliverables. So at that time I had already been playing with, I had been doing drone racing, custom building drones and doing the FPV stuff. And it was back when you fully had to program and wire. We always said that like it was 4 hours on the table working on the drone for about 4 minutes of fun out in the field before you crashed it and the whole thing, split in half or something. So I found out about virtual production. So through the means of classic Matt Workman and the SIGGRAPH demo of ICVFX. And at that time, it was really hard to get any information on how to do it. So I found out about VP, and I was already studying optics, and I already started to include things like projectors into my cinematography for like more stylized music videos. So I already had an idea of how to expose cameras, the general idea of how cameras picked up color for projectors and for basically filming a light, which is not the same as filming normal life, which is reflective light, and then some spatial awareness stuff. So I dove down the path of learning and display, and it was really hard back then because it was like you just go off the documentation, which was the first time I've ever had to properly understand documentation like that in a technical level. And then following a couple videos that were just kind of showing how things were set up. And then once I figured out a workflow for it, I was able to adapt my already existing cinematography experience. So the moment that I had a scene up, I was able to make it look fairly good. So all of my first test videos looked better than most high-end LED wall beginning test videos at that time, where it was mostly ran by live event people and things like that. So I kind of had a leg up in that way. So I converted that little workflow that I put together into the first, it was before VP Toolkit existed, into the first video series on how to do in-camera VFX step by step for projectors, or for, most people learned how to run LED walls on that. And so now, fast forward, 3-4 years of working on every single job you can imagine, in different countries, dealing with tons of different crews, and setting up and helping train a ton of studios around the world. We're now here. So we're working on our next online course, which is going to be, I think, the 5th or 6th run of the series of showing people how to do in-camera VFX.
Very cool. So were there any movies or things that you saw as a kid that made you want to head in this direction? It sounds like you began in audio and through experimentation and trying lots of different types of things that you kind of settled on production and camera as opposed to audio. And then,
Yeah.
but did you have any ambitions before that to get into film, or was it more kind of through experimentation?
I didn't even know that film was a thing. I like as a kid, I didn't have that in my life. Uh, so it wasn't a thought of mine to be able to. I loved watching movies and I loved classical stuff. Even as a kid, I loved classical music and I liked old films. One of my favorite shows when I was growing up was like the original Batman with, oh, excuse me, Adam West. So it's, I've always enjoyed things that weren't really what everybody else was. And then I've always found ways to uh, try and like do things. I just always wanted to create stuff. That's what it is like, and then I like solving problems around creating stuff. And there you go. That's the film industry. You're like, we have something
Solving
we have to
problems.
create. Now we got to solve all the problems to make it so that we can create that. But
You,
no, I didn't have any specific stuff. I just really always loved it. I always loved photography. I've kind of actually gone the opposite end of things. I always wanted to be different, so I tried not to consume as much stuff, and I wanted to just try and tell something with originality, like just naturally. And after a while, you learn all the techniques and the things that bring you into that same world as everybody else, technically, but a lot of times what you're telling, can be original. And I hope that comes through in some of my music videos and things that I'm proud of as a cinematographer or as like a director or coming up with concepts for stories.
do you make your own? Have you made any of your own movies? We'll get on to talking about some of the stuff that you've done for other people, for sure. But any of your own short films or your own
Yeah,
music videos?
I have a horror short film on YouTube that has like, I don't even know what it's at. I want to check. It has like, I don't know, maybe like 70,000 views. It might be up to 100 by now. And it is bad. It's real bad. I actually released a video uh like a year after that explains all the things that happened on that production. And it was the beginning of my YouTubing days, uh explaining what went wrong.
So you're going to tell us?
You want to know what it is? So let's see.
Yeah.
It's
Tell us what went wrong, or in fact, tell us just what was the intention for it. You wanted to make your own film. You wanted to experiment with YouTube. What were you doing?
Yeah, no, so I was making commercials and I started making these 1 minute skits. So I would just like film a room. It would be like, I don't know, my brother taking a glass of water with like the sunset coming through the window, and then I'd get shots, separate shots for all of the different aspects of it. So like when he pulled out the chair, it would cut to like a close up of the bottom of the chair. And I already had been studying audio engineering, so like all of the Foley was like perfect. So I was figuring out how to tell little stories, and then those just got more and more complex. And then I wanted to; those are all on the Ian Fursa YouTube. If you just go back in time, uh, I wanted to tell something slightly longer, and I wanted to try like a horror film. So I'm trying to remember what the heck is the name of it. It's with uh, I forget. I'll find it sometime. But the difficulty is this was before I ran a production company. So the labor involved, it was the beginning of when I started learning how to manage people. So the girl that I had a house that I was moving. It's completely empty. So I was like, I have 2 more days that I can be in this house. I'm going to film a horror film because you have an empty house. I just staged some boxes, like, the person just moved in or just moved out. So the concept was uh, basically the person is crazy and the whole time she thinks she's going to get murdered, but then she ends up murdering someone else. And the whole thing is just really confusing. But so a lot of the issues with the script, I was like, oh, I'll fix them on set. And
Not
you
the
don't
place to fix a script.
fix the script on set. And
Although
at 2 in the morning, when your sister's holding the slate and you're like, your other talent is and the makeup artist is in the other room sleeping because, and you're sitting there trying to get a shot, so that was mistake number one. The actress that I originally had that did rehearsals with and everything didn't show up on day one, so we just completely lost a day. And then day two, a friend of mine that did theater, she just showed up and, did her best. And then the people that I was having come help me, of course, unpaid. These were not, this is before I got into more film circles. I could have a lot of reliable people just show up if, a lot of people want to work on things. It's great. But these were not those people. They were like doing a favor. They showed up on day one, but since the actress didn't show up, they didn't show up on day two.
Okay.
So they're like, I'm not doing this. So I had a new actress. Just the guy that came to me to be a PA ended up doing audio, played the bad guy, and helped the whole time. So yeah.
One person crew in the end.
Yep.
Yep.
It was just me for like we probably filmed from 5 p.m. Till like 6 or 7 in the morning.
So you learned about pre-production and call sheets and
I learned about a lot of things.
That's how we learn, though, right? You learn.
I put it all in a video on YouTube. Go check it out.
You learn more by the things that don't go right than you do by the things that succeed.
By failing. That's the best way to learn. And that's why I always get sad when I see filmmakers or people in VP that don't get started, because there's so many unanswered questions that you can't fail at. Like, you need to fail at it. You just have to. You got to go into Unreal and hit the thing that makes it crash 5 times before you know how to build a process and how to understand the technology. And it all reveals itself as you go through the process and as you learn it. And there's so much great material, like your content and the stuff we have on YouTube to give you a path to be able to start learning, now.
You tell us a little bit about some of the virtual production projects that you've worked on. Like, do you have a favorite one that stands out?
A favorite. I feel like this last year has just been like a blur. But because you start to work on them, and then you go a lot of commercial projects, and then I need a music video soon, just because they always end up being chaotic but memorable, because you do some crazy stuff and you just kind of make it work, where commercials are a little more like, if this idea doesn't work, we've sold it to client. I'd probably say the 21 Pilots music video was probably one of the ones that sticks out to me, just because.
Tell us more about it. What was the project?
I feel like I don't want to say it was like early days for in-camera VFX, but it was definitely, compared to the standards that we now have and just the reliability of the machines and stuff, and how much we kind of know, and of course how much I've learned and experienced since then. It's just so we do a lot more in pre-pro now, but some of the environments, there's a great team on that. The environment builders, it was So Crispy, I think is their name, but they have a really popular YouTube channel, and they did all of the environments for this video. But yet this was their first time working on like an in-camera VFX large scale production. They'd done a lot of YouTube stuff, but there's different politics, there's different workflows, there's totally different mindset when you're working on your own YouTube content as opposed to, a production for millions of dollars get put into these productions. And so there's tons of times where, like the one time we were working on an environment and we were just trying to edit things and get it to perform correctly. And the director was already looking through the camera and everybody was kind of like, we were getting ready to go. And I accidentally turned off all of the lights in the environment. It was just like, I was testing something and I was like, okay, let's see if the lights affect the frame rate. Let's see how much that's bogging things down. So I turned them off, and the emissives in the room of the virtual world just popped out, and all of the background that had, was a white room pretty much became this like really nice black, like reflective room with all of these strips of white across it. And we all just looked at each other. And I looked down at the director and I was like, and he was like, yeah, actually, let's go with this. So it was like totally the, accident ended up becoming, I forget what the term is, that like the happy accident. Ended up becoming what the music video was, and that's the most, that's the best looking shot, and that was where we filmed most of the content for the music video, was in that thing that we accidentally hit the lights off and everybody agreed it looked better. So it's just like it's amazing to understand some of the flexibility of these types of setups, and it's cool to see in smaller commercial stuff and smaller music video stuff where they're able to explore a little more. Where, if you're going out on a commercial and you've sold storyboards, you've sold the shots, or you have everything perfectly planned out, you may still find some happy. You may go, a lot of times I'll have the director be like, what if we turn this way? I just want to get this extra pickup shot, and you can find some beautiful stuff that way. But when you just go into the world and you have some skilled, talented people that, are willing to just figure it out, there's still room for that creativity, even in this space. But it's usually in the smaller studios.
I miss music videos. They're always tons of fun because of that. You can be more creative and experimental a lot of the time, more like off script. So what's it like? What's the difference for you between working on bigger budget, larger productions and working on smaller things? Do you prefer one or the other? Do you like doing both?
I'd probably say I like doing both, because there's a predictability to higher end commercials to a certain degree. Sometimes they're over scheduled, and then you're like, hey, you didn't leave time for us to reset the calibration of the tracking, or and then that's complicated. But a lot of times those productions have more resources to work with. So for me, I'm either a little more hands off and more in a supervising role, or I'm only operating once in a while, where on lower budget stuff, as far as lower like total budget for the commercial or whatever, you have more flexibility though. You have the if you have a skilled operator or somebody that understands stuff, they can tweak things until you're rolling. So for me, as somebody that can go in there and relight the scene live while the camera's just sitting there while we're waiting for the talent to get their last looks, and I'm like, okay, well, the director's not going to want this light in the background a little dark, a little bright. On a smaller budget, that's perfectly fine, but on a larger budget film, that's not okay. So or a film or a commercial, or sometimes music video. A lot of times music video, it's like everybody's kind of dancing to make it look good and get it within time. But it all depends upon the crew and how the general workflows are going and the politics on set. Because sometimes I've worked on productions where they're at the highest level but we had, of course, the least flexibility as far as making sure that the the deliverable was right. Like production wanted us to not do anything until they asked for it, but then we were the ones that could see all the problems with our department. So then they were just like, you don't touch anything, we like this. But we're like, but what about that aliasing, and what about the moire that you're getting on the wall, and what about, you know, this and that and this and that. And we just, you know, on a production set, once you're told no, you just gotta be like, okay, have a great time. But on smaller commercials, there's a lot more flexibility, I think, for that more creative on set. And not saying anything bad about larger productions, because sometimes that's the only way you can get that strict politics, is the only way that you can have so many creative people on one set to create one large piece of art all together. But it's got to happen, you know, it's got to have its check marks when you're at that scale.
Yeah, absolutely. But what can you tell us a little bit about your role, or do you get hired for multiple things? I know you come from the world of cinematography and being a DP, but you're also a virtual production supervisor. Do you still get hired for both of those, or multiple roles? What's your typical thing that you're doing on set these days?
Yeah. I don't get hired as a DP anymore because I just don't look for that work. It does sound fun to DP a job, but also all of my workflows and what I'm doing daily is mostly virtual production supervisor. Occasionally, I get hired as a UE op, but most of the time I'm just on as a supervisor, and then we'll have a operator or two on set, and then occasionally I operate. Oh, excuse me, I operate, but I'm mostly there to just make sure the whole thing gets done right, and that's a lot of communicating from the beginning what the needs are of the virtual stage, and then working with the VAD to make sure that creatively, sometimes it's depending upon how your communication chains are set up. Sometimes we're uh, involved super early, and then we're kind of the bridge between the VAD and client. So we're just saying, oh, client needs this, and then VAD and us work together to make sure that that's facilitated. But sometimes I'm brought on really late, and I'm literally like, they just hand me the content, and they're like, here's all the ideas that we sold to client, and now make sure it works on set.
What are some good qualities of a good virtual? Maybe some of the people out there might not know what a virtual production supervisor is. What's some good qualities of a virtual production supervisor, and what could a typical day look like for you?
Well, in the last month, I've met a bunch of virtual production supervisors and worked with them. And it's amazing how different people bring different specialties and bring different expertise to the role. Because if you're coming from VFX, post VFX, and you're now a VP supervisor because you've learned, you know, the whole ecosystem, and you've had experience with camera tracking or whatever, and then now you're on the roll, you're going to come from a very different mindset than how I'm at. It's a lot of thinking about it just in post, fixing less things on set sometimes, but then also not understanding as much of the on set like needs. But that's not saying that specifically is that way. But the what I'm generally doing on a production is, I always just say I'm just there to make it look good and make sure everybody's happy. But what that really means is working with the VAD to make sure that the environments are going to be compatible to render on end display and on the wall. So that's validations of environments. So that's working with them to implement optimization techniques and things, as well as facilitating that we're doing the proper testing to make sure that those environments are checked before we get on set, hopefully. And then once we're on set, and then also talking with production about what their general plan is. How close are they planning to shoot to the wall? How close is the talent going to be to the wall? How much are they raising the talent up? What are they using for props? Does that match the virtual props that we have to blend? Is the camera settings going to be accurate? Maybe at that time, I'm also potentially just pointing out potential issues like, hey, if you rack the focus a little too far, you're going to be focused on the wall because it's a curve. Maybe those things aren't taken into consideration. So I'm there to just, hit the check marks and make sure that everything that we plan to do is as close to, going to work on a set. And then once we're on set, I always joke around and just say, my job on set is mostly telling the director of photography to stop spilling light on the LED wall, because I'm staring at the monitor looking for any issues that could be a problem for the future. So that's looking at hopefully a calibrated monitor. Sometimes I'll try and get a log feed so that I can have my own LUT on my monitor. So that means I can basically convert it from its raw form to like visible. So that way I'm able to see where things are actually laying. So say if something like, light spilling on the LED wall causes the contrast ratios of the LED wall to be really low. So that means everything in the background looks flat. It doesn't look, sharp and contrasty like you want it. And then you can also run into issues like lines, because if you have a flat wall doesn't have these, but if you have a curved wall, you can actually see the sides of the panels being lit on the curve. And then that shows up as almost like there's a curtain over your environment. And that happens a lot. So I have to talk with all the different departments to make sure that there's protocols on set to flag lights and to grid things. And then we're also looking at, everything. It's everything within that frame in that virtual world, having to understand tracking systems, so that we know if the Moses system goes underneath this thing, we have to, or I have to make sure that I flag that before it happens. So telling production like, okay, if you're going to use this giant 12 by 12 overhead, you're not going to have tracking. So can you light it a different way, or are we shooting something that's like inside of a little bottle and where we don't need tracking for that specific shot? Or and it's just trying to get as many of those out of the way before we get there. But sometimes that stuff is taken care of on set. And then it's working with the virtual art department on set or operator to facilitate any changes that are needed to the environment. So if they're like that building in the background, we want it turned the other way because we don't like the way that this side of it looks, then I'm working with the virtual art department, sometimes communicating that directly to them and giving those instructions. I generally find it's good to have a bit of like a translator between heads of production and our UE guys, some of the and girls. Some of them are better than others at taking more creative direction. Like I was on a production and the director jokingly said something about like a train track, and the next day our environment had a train track through the middle, and everybody was so confused at how that happened. But it was because of that direct connection and not having like a little bit of a filtration between the things that production ask for, which sometimes they don't know what they're asking for. They might ask for more, the background more out of focus, but how you do that, there's 100 ways on how to do that. So I'm generally there to make sure that whatever techniques we're using to facilitate their changes are going to look good and not blow up the environment.
So typically, like getting a little bit of time in advance to prepare, make sure that those things are in place.
Of course, we can plan out the whole thing. I've had productions where I went on set and I sat there and I was like, this is great. Like just looking at the monitor, like happy, because or we made tweaks just for like, oh, how can we make this even better?
We have a couple of questions that are coming in here from our audience. One person's asking about the importance of asking you to explain a little bit about the importance of proper media server installations and the minimal and optimal requirements for operating a decent virtual production volume.
Isn't that always the question?
Big question, I guess.
Yeah. So do it however you want, man. No. So, I mean, I would probably say the fundamental requirement for a media server is a GPU that can be gen locked.
Right.
Everything else is negotiable. You'll get varying performance from different things. A lot of times we're using higher end Threadripper Pros inside of our media servers, and then either a single or dual GPU. Right now, a lot of times we use A6000s, which is the NVIDIA A6000. This GPU has the ability to be connected to a sync card, and then that sync card can receive a camera genlock signal, a synchronization signal that makes it so that you can synchronize your GPU with your LED wall with your camera. And if you're unable to do that, you can't guarantee results on a production set, because you could even restart your LED wall or TV or projector or whatever you're using. Now, that's not to say that you can do some fun stuff on a projector, or I like to, and I'm working on a YouTube video for this that's going to be coming out soon. I like to use my laptop for all kinds of stuff. So I'm going to be releasing a video that's specifically for like YouTubers and streamers and people that want to just play with this or have access to using in-camera VFX, but understanding that you can only use some camera settings. Sometimes the limitation of your TV or projector will cause it so that you have so many problems. But in a server for rendering multiple clusters of LED wall, you're going to need that gen lockable GPU. You're going to need a fast CPU. You're going to need probably tons of storage, because Unreal environments are very big. You're going to need, we usually over 100 gigs of RAM in most cases, and then power it all, keep it all cool, and yeah. I'm partners in a company, Catalyst Virtual, and we've been working on the hardware and software side of rendering on these volumes, and you can check out our website's catalyst-vp.com, and we're currently in the process. It's an older site, but we're currently in the process of redoing that, and we're hoping in the next couple months. We've been working on kind of like a template for these types of setups. Like, what would just a 2-node render node setup look like line by line? And that's in the idea of how do you build the whole thing into a single rack? What does that look like? What components are the most necessary components that if you just went baseline doing this, but at a high level, what would that look like? And then we're hoping to release that as kind of like a fun educational article, but we're still working on refining that setup. So wouldn't hold your breath, but hopefully in the next month or so.
Coming soon.
And we're hoping that kind of gives the answer to this. There is websites and articles on this all over the place. It's one of the most common asked questions I've seen.
Well, looking forward to that. We'll definitely share it with the community when it comes out. You also made and run the VP Toolkit. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What that is?
Yeah. So when I first started working on in-camera VFX productions, my first on-set production that I didn't help with remotely. At first, COVID was really bad, so a lot of the productions were like hush hush, a lot of tests. We were doing a lot of development tests with companies all over the place. But my first in-person one was with MCM Global, which is a like high-end fashion brand, and it was one of the most high-end commercial shoots I've ever been on up to that point. And it was the first time I was using Unreal on a production set with that pace. So I just, every time I had to do something, I just questioned myself and said, why am I clicking 8 times to change my camera exposure? You know, why is there no features to be able to do, you know, to save these camera settings and just recall them? Why can't I just save my stage config position? So directly after that, I started playing with blueprints, and then that became a bit of an obsession, you might say. And then I started building the VP Toolkit plugin. Since then, VP Toolkit has hired tons of contractors, C++ developers, UI developers, and then sometimes and then we've also developed our own proprietary ways of handling depth of field for in-camera VFX and tracking and all of the basic calibration things that you need to do on set. So that plugin is available on our website. It's called the Studio plugin, and that's designed to speed up production workflows and take what you do in previs, so it has a ton of prevising tools, and then directly use those same tools and those same workflows when you run your set, so that what you get in previs is exactly the same as what you get on your set, and then you actually have widgets and panels to not have to click 10 times to change your camera exposure or load settings or load a position, and making it a lot easier for integrating new projects. I worked on a project where we had it got shut down because of the strike, but at the end we had 68 environments, and integrating our stage configuration into each of those environments was a full-time job. So we just I took what already existed in VP Toolkit and built those tools out further, so that when we got into a project, we only had to click like 5 buttons and it just generated all the levels, set them to always loaded. And then now that's a feature in the plugin that has been developed by other people to make it more user-friendly and easier to use. But so VP Toolkit also we do a lot of training as well. So studios reach out to us because of our YouTube videos and our just general, awareness in the realm of ICVFX VP. And we can do in-person training. We can do remote training, and that looks like we show you the concepts, we help you make sure that your stuff is all set up through that process, and then we do a demo production, and then we leave you with like 2 days and then meet with you a couple days after to just make sure that everybody has everything. But on top of that, we facilitate productions that I'm also not on. So we have level artists and mostly contractors for level artist operators and different crew that could work on productions. And then we oversee it to make sure that everything gets done correctly, and that that burden of responsibility doesn't fall into the production. We can switch people in and out if somebody can't make it or there's some type of issue. But yeah, I would say that's most of VP Toolkit, and we try to just help anybody that we can help with doing this, using this technology to tell stories.
Another question that's come in here from the audience. Someone's asking, can you point me in a good direction to ensure color consistency between our studios? currently am seeing too much variation in what they create, and the look of my live production shows it's green screen and VP over Unreal Engine.
Good luck. Have a great day. No, so that's going to be really tough. The only way you can do it is you have to understand the color pipeline. You got to work backwards from there. You got to say, what is the color format that you're going to see on your LED wall? What does that look like? And you have to make sure that your pipeline on your green screen, whatever you're compositing with. So most likely you could be doing like a linear out of Unreal to an S-Log because you're filming your stuff and compositing it in S-Log, or you could be using Rec 709. So you want to make sure that that color pipeline is accurate, and that will give you an endpoint so that when you communicate to the people making content, you can make sure that they're using the proper color transforms. So if you have a bad, monitor, you're just never gonna. They're always going to be looking at something different than you're looking at. It's just there's no way around it. But if you have a semi-correct monitor and they're looking at a viewport that is properly converted, so Unreal Engine naturally is in linear. It's linear Rec 709 or sRGB. So that means that it doesn't have like a contrast curve naturally. So it's very flat looking. Then when you convert it and you look at it in an editor, it's converting it to like a gamma sRGB curve. So that means it adds contrast to it. It shifts the colors so that it looks right on an sRGB monitor. Now, if you're using a Rec 709 monitor or not an sRGB monitor that matches that contrast curve, they're not going to be looking at the same thing as you when you do the same but accurate correction on your set or your production or whatever. I think that pretty much answers it without, getting into the nitty-gritty of color science, because that's what you have to understand. And I hope that you're already using some of that in your conversions to do green screen. But you have to probably figure out a workflow with whoever you're working with to confirm that they're looking at the right image or sending you updates in with the right conversions, so that anything that you're approving or talking about, everybody's on the same page as to what it actually looks like. This is an issue that I deal with on productions all the way up to the top. It's not often, especially like a commercial production or something that has to move really quick. This stuff is not taken into consideration. A lot of times we're looking at a monitor like in Unreal that looks one way, and then we're looking at it at a camera on the LED wall and it looks a completely different way. And that's because that's a hard transition to make. But with green screen, it's actually a little easier because you're compositing the feed directly, and you don't have a camera filming a giant screen. So you can remove that variable. So you should be able to get it perfect, but politics might not allow you to get it perfect.
You do a lot of green screen. You more green, more LED, or more green these days?
My focus and VP Toolkit's focus is on in-camera VFX VP. So LED projectors, screens, just because the physical element of it, and it's just our niche and specialty. Now, myself, I've worked on a ton of green screen stuff, but most of the time, my focus is like set viz. So having an on-set monitor, or all the monitors sometimes, display an idea of what it's going to look like in the final, and then recording that with time code so that they can begin their edit quickly. So we're using it to just visualize what's happening. So a cinematographer can go, okay, I see there's a window over here, and there's going to be a thing in the background. And now I'm going to set up my lights that way to match that, because I actually can see what I'm doing. But most of the time that comp isn't final. I would say that most of the time live real-time comping is only enough quality for broadcast where you can have some subtle issues, or it's not quite there for more cinematic looks, especially when you're using like anamorphic lenses. So we just kind of like set visit and then record both the comps, and then final images get created in post.
Much instance of using green on LED walls, ghost frame, like using both?
I've actually never used ghost frame for green screen, at least I should say yet. It's bound to happen, but I have used ghost frame for multiple frustums. So having multiple cameras film the LED wall at the same time, it's really cool, and it kind of screws with your mind because when you look at the screen, it just looks like a bunch of mush. And then when you look at the different camera feeds, they're like sharp, perfect images that are two completely different perspectives. Now, in combination, I've only used on the LED wall, we've only used it to cover small things. So like if we had to just kind of remove an area or put space for like a virtual CGI character, we've used small green screen pieces, and we've also filmed on green screen really quick to then put characters in the background, like literally filmed in the studio, and then like 2 hours later we had them in the background of an ICVFX scene. But not a lot of the combination of the two, besides every once in a while when you can't get the virtual background to look right and there's just no time anymore, or there's a piece of content that wasn't delivered, and production just asks, can we make the screen green? And you go, well, we can do better than that, but yeah, we can
One
make
last
it
question.
green with track markers. Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. No, it's good to hear what people are doing up there. It's good to get a flavor of the different flavors of VP. One last question we'll take before we wrap is it possible to run a small VP volume without a media server?
I guess that would depend upon how you define a media server. Really, you could run a small volume with any computer that has the ability to run a gen-lockable GPU. Now, your performance might not be great. And most of the time you want to run multiple machines, and then you may not have the best workflow for 2D playback of plates, depending upon how simple or complex your setup is. But a lot of studios run off of non-media server designed workstations, but having a media server almost guarantees that you have server grade products and pieces of equipment that are designed to run for years at a time. They're designed to never be turned off. They're built to do what you're doing. Now, a basic PC or a basic workstation, a lot of the parts in there are not designed to run 2 GPUs at full speed for 3 days straight. They're just not built for it. Parts wear out and things like that if you don't go with professional server grade technology. But no, you don't need a media server. You can run it on a laptop if you want, but miles may vary.
Answer.
Mileage may vary.
One last question I'll ask is, are you seeing any machine learning techniques in your travels in virtual production? Most people like to call it AI, but
yeah, you like machine learning?
Yeah,
I like that switch. I'm going to start calling it that. AI is too poppy. It's like too mainstream.
also fairly inaccurate. in most cases. But
because
anyway,
you're right.
let's call it AI just for fun. Are you seeing much use of AI in your travels?
I wouldn't say a ton in some regards. So, of course, anybody that's doing creative work is using ChatGPT. Like, if you're not, you're probably falling behind, because the ability to use ChatGPT to organize and to like facilitate, and sometimes to just like play with, to generate new ideas. And those ideas can be yours, but you could just give it some type of parameters to, so that's basic storytelling, organization. And you see that a lot in production, or you don't see that because sometimes, it's happening in the background more. But one of the main things that I've been seeing is I haven't used any AI generated assets. I did work with Kubrick on a demo before, and so I used, I think, an earlier version of their like 2D but put in
2.5D.
3D stuff, all ran by NDisplay, like the same exact thing that we do with the virtual environment, just using their generated plates instead of 3D assets. But I've never used that on a production. But what I do see is for creating textures that you can tile well. So there's, I wish I could, I'm probably not going to be able to remember any of the sites, but out there's the ability to take a texture or generate textures using machine learning to or AI, to then make a tileable texture that just works infinitely, instead of having to kind of like paint that yourself if you had to.
Well, yeah, it's good to get the pulse on what people are actually using out there. Well,
Yeah,
Ian,
it's crazy.
it's been a total pleasure having you on. Thanks so much for joining us on the podcast today. Is there anything you'd like to share with the audience, anywhere they can follow you or keep in touch?
Yeah, I don't want to give you too many links, but YouTube, VP Toolkit. You can find me on LinkedIn and VP Toolkit as well. I post there a lot, and also Instagram at VP Toolkit. And then our website, where you can access all of these sites as well, is vp-toolkit.com. And I hope to see everybody there, and sometimes at conferences. Give us a call if you need anything.
Cool. Well, thank you again for your time. Thanks for being on the show. Thank you to our studio audience as well for being here and asking good questions. We'll be back in another couple of weeks with another episode, but our open day is this evening. If you would like to come and join us and learn more about CG Pro, the school, and some of the courses that we have coming up in virtual production and computer graphics and visual effects in general. So yeah, been a total pleasure.
Thank you, Ed. It's always a pleasure. I miss you in the real life.
I'm still there in real life.
I know. I just don't get to see you.
I'm sure I'll see you soon. Maybe at NAB or one of the shows coming up.
Oh yeah, that's coming up. I might be on the job, but I'll see you soon.
For sure. Well, thank you. Thank you again. Thanks, everybody. See you in a couple of weeks. Take care. Bye-bye for now.
Bye.